happy people. You're watching the Young Turks with Anna Kasparian. And since it's Wednesday, my co-host is John Iadarola for the first hour, host of the Damage Report, good friend of mine. And the father of all dragons. That's who John Iadarola is. How you doing,
majority.
John?
I'm good. I'm good. A lot of kids. It's an obligation, but also an honor. But no, I'm excited. I'm always excited to do the news on Wednesday. And I'm also, and I mean this in only the most good way or neutral way, not in a bad way. It feels like it's always Wednesday. Like, I feel like we just did this, didn't we? I love it, but I feel like I just did.
We did for your
Roughly
show.
Oh, that's true.
Well,
yeah,
that's true as well. Yeah, so everyone go check out the Damage Report, which I co-hosted with John yesterday. And Brett Ehrlich, who produces this show, also hosted today. So the Damage Report, one of the fan faves over at TYT Network. So make sure you check it out. And also follow John and the Damage Report over at TikTok, where I guess you're putting out TikTok videos now, which is cool. Very hip.
That's a good guess.
Very edgy.
You nailed it, honestly. That's what we're doing.
Oh my goodness. All right, well, we have a lot of news to get to today, including some more concrete details regarding Joe Biden's infrastructure proposal. We have a better understanding of where his priorities are on that piece of legislation. In hour two, Nando Vila will be joining me, and we'll probably talk about all sorts of lefty stuff, including what should be done when it comes to student loan debt, if we get to that, if we don't get to that in the first hour. We'll also talk about the aftermath of the coup in Bolivia. Luckily, they were able to overpower those forces and actually have a democratic election. But the United States is pushing forward with some talking points that I think could be problematic. So let's squash them in the process. But before we get to all of that, John, why don't we touch on what we're learning about migrant facilities and detention centers at the border? You ready?
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. We're learning more about migrant detention centers that the Biden administration is keeping unaccompanied minors in. Now, previously, the Biden administration refused to be transparent and did not allow the media to tour these facilities. But now the Associated Press and CBS News were both able to tour the main detention facility for unaccompanied migrant children in the border, and it's the facility in Donna, Texas specifically. So we're gonna show you some video in just a second, but I think that giving you a little more context into what the reporters experienced is important, because unfortunately the situation is just as bad as we had suspected. For instance, more than 4,000 people, including children and families, were crammed into a space intended for 250, and the youngest were kept in a large playpen with mats on the floor for sleeping. The children were also being housed by the hundreds in 8 so-called pods formed by plastic dividers, each about 3,200 square feet in size, and many of those pods had more than 500 children in them. So there's no question that this detention center is jam-packed with people. The conditions are very similar to what we saw during the Trump administration, and we do have a quick CBS News report to get to show you what that scene looked like.
Inside this processing facility run by Border Patrol, plastic pods have become an overcrowded purgatory for migrants waiting to seek asylum.
HHS does not have the adequate beds to be able to take on all of these kids.
There are roughly 4,100 people here, 17 times what the facility was built to hold. More than half are unaccompanied children. They all sleep on the floor, some with mats and others with foil blankets. Jacqueline Perez crossed the river this morning with her 2-month-old baby despite the dangers. We do it out of necessity, otherwise we wouldn't come here, she says. She left Guatemala to find a job in the United States and will likely end up at the Donna facility. This is where the smallest children stay. Somehow they crossed into the US alone, now awaiting their fate in a tiny space never meant for children.
So Jean, there's no question that this is a difficult situation. Biden has committed to avoiding the deportation of unaccompanied minors, mostly because the federal courts demand that he commit to that. The tail end of the Trump administration had a federal court ruling indicating that he couldn't just use deportation of unaccompanied minors as the default strategy. So he had no choice but to allow them into these facilities for processing as well. But these children are only supposed to be in the detention facilities for 72 hours max. And unfortunately, they're spending a lot more time there because there's a backlog, there aren't enough resources committed to actually dealing with this situation appropriately. And really, there is no difference in the way that these migrant children are being treated right now versus how they were treated toward the end of Trump's administration. This is different, let me be clear. This is different from taking children away from their parents at the border. That was Trump's zero tolerance policy. In this case, you have an influx of unaccompanied minors coming to the border, and Biden is bringing them in because he has to. But the way it's kind of being reported makes it seem like there's a significant difference, effectively, in the way that these migrant children are being processed, and that's just not true. That's not the case.
Yeah, there's arguably in some of the photos less chain link. That's about it. That's pretty much it. It doesn't really seem like much of a difference. You still end up with a bunch of people sleeping on the ground. By the way, maybe we don't need to remind people of this. It's still a pandemic. You cannot cram people together like that if we were in a totally cool public health situation. We are very much not, though. And so it's dangerous for a ton of different reasons. That is one of the big ones. We can go through all the things that we always say when we talk about this, about how Biden, theoretically has better motives and blah, blah, no Stephen Miller, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, there's still a ton of people there. It didn't happen like a week ago. We've been talking about this for weeks now. I think we can expect better than the Matts. I think we can. I think that if we can, our military has a missile with blades that spring out so they can hit a car and kill people in the car without an explosion, just from the actual blades. It's that accurate. We can't figure out how to purchase beds. There's no mattresses nearby. There's no Walmart or anything like that. We only have a defense budget of like $700 or $800 billion. So clearly it would take months and months to figure out how to get people off the ground, or to how to make some extra space, or how to, we're not traveling. Rent out hotels, rent out motels. You could do all of this. And maybe you can't do it in one day, but I do not think it is unreasonable to expect that in a month, 2 months, you can't figure that out. It just seems completely unacceptable. Motivation's better, whatever. That buys you a couple of days, I guess, to figure it out. And now we get to expect that we don't end up with a situation that is indistinguishable from under Trump. And one really last final point, people should be way more pissed off at the press secretary right now, because the press secretary swore a couple weeks ago, "Oh, we'd love to let you people in. We just have to figure out the security for their privacy or whatever." Nope, it's because it looked like that. That's why they didn't want the cameras in there. There's no different security thing. You can still see them in the video now, except what you see is really bad and inconvenient to them. So I really hope that Biden and the press secretary get some hard questions about their previous delaying tactics.
I mean, look, to be, I guess, fair to reporters, that was really the only thing that reporters had any interest in asking Biden about during his first press conference, his first presidential press conference. I didn't really enjoy the framing coming from the reporters, because it seemed like they were trying to get Biden to commit to just deporting unaccompanied minors. Which, they should have probably done a little bit of homework to see how the federal courts have ruled on that very issue. But nonetheless, putting that aside, I think you're right. I mean, there are these short-term solutions in providing the resources necessary to handle this situation at the border appropriately. But then there's also, a long-term solution as well that so far I don't see a lot of journalists drawing connections to. I see some independent journalists drawing connections to, and Biden is on the wrong course when it comes to it, and that's foreign policy, right? So he's continuing on with the same type of rhetoric that we heard from Trump in regard to Venezuela. The United States goes in there and succeeds in implementing some sort of coup. I mean, they certainly tried several times under the Trump administration, and they just install whatever US puppet they want. What is that gonna do to further destabilize the situation in Venezuela? And then you have US citizens who are like, why do we have this influx of migrants coming to the border? As if we played no role, as if the United States played no role. That video that we showed you, in the end of it, I made sure to include the woman from Guatemala. I mean, obviously, the United States led a coup in Guatemala as well, which led to a lot of economic pain and crime in that country. So these are things that we need to look at. It's not a quick fix. It is a difficult situation. There's no question, right? But there needs to be a holistic approach as opposed to, send them all back, or that's really all I'm hearing in terms of solutions. And that's not really a solution. I think that the US needs to take responsibility for its role in causing what we're experiencing at the border right now.
Yeah.
But just to give you a few more details before we move on, the youngest children, among them a 3-year-old girl being cared for by her 11-year-old brother and a newborn with a 17-year-old mother, are kept out of the pods and they sleep in that playpen area. The Border Patrol generally is not supposed to detain children for more than 3 days, but Health and Human Services lacks the space. So more than 2,000 kids have been at this particular facility, the Donna facility, for more than 72 hours, including 39 for more than 15 days. And then I do want to call out the Associated Press because it does show that they haven't done their homework about why Biden has committed to accepting unaccompanied minors. They say that Biden has declined to resume the Trump era practice of expelling unaccompanied immigrant children. No, but that's not true, right? Trump did want to expel unaccompanied migrant children, but the federal courts told him he couldn't do that. He was citing coronavirus as the reason for deporting literally anyone who came to the border, including children. And when a judge ruled that he couldn't do that with unaccompanied minors, he stopped that practice. And so obviously Biden, whether he wants to or not, does not have the ability to deport children. And that framing matters, right? Because what they're trying to do here is draw a distinction, and that distinction, I think, unfairly gives Biden credit that he just doesn't deserve yet. So far, he hasn't really materially done anything different from what we were experiencing toward the end of Trump's administration, and we got to be honest about that. If you're not honest about it, you can't talk about solutions, and that's an issue. Yep. All right, let's move on to some other news today. Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz is big story. So big story, folks. Big, not good, bad. All right, so Matt Gaetz appeared on the Tucker Carlson show to attempt to defend himself, although you wouldn't think that's the case based on how this conversation went down. So just to give you a little background on what he's defending himself on Tuesday, news broke that the Department of Justice was investigating whether Gaetz had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old and paid for her to travel with him, which by the way breaks federal sex trafficking laws. 3 sources briefed on the probe told the New York Times. Gaetz, in an Axios story later that day, denied the allegations, but confirmed that he was under investigation. Gaetz says that the accusations were part of an extortion effort. And he also alleged that he and his father are cooperating with the FBI and that his father is wearing a wire. Because when someone's wearing a wire, you would want to make a public announcement about it. But with that said, how did the conversation with Tucker Carlson go? Let's take a look.
The New York Times is running a story that I have traveled with a 17-year-old woman, and that is verifiably false. People can look at my travel records and see that that is not the case. What is happening is an extortion of me and my family involving a former Department of Justice official. And the FBI and the Department of Justice were so concerned about this attempted extortion of a member of Congress that they asked my dad to wear a wire, which he did with the former Department of Justice official. Tonight, I am demanding that the Department of Justice and the FBI release the audio recordings that were made under their supervision and at their direction, which will prove my innocence.
What is the allegation? That's really not very clear from these news stories.
Yeah, again, I only know what I've read in the New York Times. I can say that actually you and I went to dinner about 2 years ago. Your wife was there and I brought a friend of mine, you'll remember her, and she was actually threatened by the FBI, told that if she wouldn't cop to the fact that somehow I was involved in some pay-for-play scheme, that she could face trouble. And so I do believe that there are people at the Department of Justice who are trying to smear me.
So there's a lot to unpack there, John. Yep. I'm gonna let you take a stab at it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's what Tucker was thinking. There's just so much here, and I wish there was less. Yes, so he's had a very interesting defense strategy over the past day. He said there, the idea that I traveled with a 17-year-old is verifiably false. The travel, look, is an important component when it comes to the actual sex trafficking laws, because that's the illegal part, is crossing state lines and having money be involved. He didn't deny having sex with a 17-year-old there, which I feel like I would do if it weren't true. I would want to make clear that people knew that I was not, as a late 30s congressman, sleeping with a 17-year-old girl. I would want that. That would be nice. Also, he says the travel allegations are verifiably false. People can check my travel records. Okay, I mean, if it's in there, that might prove that it happened. It not being in your official travel records doesn't prove that it didn't happen. But anyway, all of this will be
John, hold on. I mean, I think that was actually a valid point, because I too keep logs of who I'm fornicating with when I'm traveling, obviously.
I've read those
kind
notes.
Of travel arrangements I've, like, what a stupid thing to say, right? Like, I'm potentially breaking sex trafficking laws with what I'm doing. Let me make sure that there's proper documentation of that. Anyway, but continue, sorry.
Yeah, and like sometimes I'll be in a store and I'll think, I really want to shoplift. Let me add it to my to-do list. No, that's not how crimes work. Also, making it about somebody attempting to extort you, I get that. Whether it's true that it's happening or not, I get it. And I'll even go so far as to say, I assume that it is true that someone is trying to extort him. I think a lot of people are missing that doesn't mean the crime didn't happen. It actually kind of indicates that it's more likely that the crime did, because you can try to extort someone for something they haven't done. Especially with being a Republican congressman, though, they're unlikely to go down for crimes they did commit, let alone ones they didn't. I would rather extort someone for a crime they committed. So I get him wanting to make this whole conversation about this DOJ guy that's like messing with his family, but the DOJ guy could be messing with his family because Matt Gaetz had sex with a 17-year-old and was bringing her across state lines. So all of that is really important. We also, whether it's a crime or not, we'll see. Whether he did anything or not, we'll see. But even like, I think we have to make clear whether he is going around trying to begin relationships with 17-year-olds, because whether that's legal or illegal, I think it's noteworthy for a public servant.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree with you on that. Well, look, obviously we don't know without a shadow of a doubt that he did what's being alleged or what he's being investigated for. So our commentary, just to be clear, is really speculative at this point. But I think it's easy to make educated guesses based on the character of the people that we're talking about. And Matt Gaetz is the type of person who can lie to the American people with a straight face. He certainly did it incessantly during the Trump administration. He did it incessantly when it came to the 2020 general election. So it's really hard to take anything that he says seriously or at face value, considering how willingly deceptive he's been in his short tenure in Congress. So we'll see what happens through the outcome of this investigation. But as he was talking in that interview, I couldn't help but think about similar types of claims that were made by Trump's lawyers in response to the outcome of the 2020 election. There was a lot of like, I demand that this gets released and that gets released, and we have all this evidence. Wait till you see all the evidence. The evidence is gonna come out and you'll see. And of course, there was no evidence. And so like, it might be different in this case with Matt Gaetz, but if I had to share my opinion, he's not a trustworthy person. With that said, though, I love that he's like trying to like relate with Tucker Carlson in this next clip.
I'm not the only person on screen right now who's been falsely accused of a terrible sex act. You were accused of something that you did not do, and so you know what this feels like. You know the pain it can bring to your family, and you know how it just puts people on defense when you're accused of something so salacious and awful.
You just referred to a mentally ill viewer who accused me of a sex crime 20 years ago, and of course it was not true. I never met the person, but I do agree with you that being accused falsely is one of the worst things that can happen.
Oh man, just in case, I want to remind people, as I did on the damage report this morning, that might or might not be what Matt Gaetz was referring to, but Tucker Carlson was also accused of sexual harassment by a frequent Fox News guest last year, not 20 years ago, and it was a woman he very much met. Whether it happened or not, we can't say, but there are far more recent accusations against him than the thing he's referring to.
What was also fascinating was the post-interview commentary from Tucker Carlson. Let's hear what he had to say.
You just saw our Matt Gaetz interview. That was one of the weirdest interviews I've ever conducted. That story just appeared in the news a couple of hours ago. And on the certainty that there's always more than you read in the newspaper, we immediately called Matt Gaetz and asked him to come on and tell us more, which, as you saw, he did. I don't think that clarified much. But it certainly showed this is a deeply interesting story, and we'll be following it. Don't quite understand it, but we'll bring you more when we find out.
I mean, that's a strong claim to make for a man who's had Rudy Giuliani on his program on multiple occasions. But I get it. I mean, if someone brought up uncomfortable accusations that were, made against me, I would not like that interview and probably respond to it in a similar way. But what I think is interesting about the story is how there is a divide among conservatives on how they're handling this, right? Because, and you'll see in a story that we're gonna do a little later from former White House staffers, there are conservatives who deeply dislike Matt Gaetz and are not defending him. But then there are some conservative lawmakers who should probably, just out of their own self-interest, avoid commenting on the story altogether. And the person that I'm referring to here is Jim Jordan, Representative Jim Jordan, who told CNN, quote, "I believe Matt Gaetz." How about you sit this one out, Jim Jordan? Because you've been accused of hiding or brushing under the rug the sexual assault of wrestlers who came to you and disclosed what they had dealt with. So, it's crazy how Jim Jordan is still in Congress. He seems untouched by that scandal. Hopefully, we learn more about it. If he is actually guilty of what he's being accused for, suffers the consequences of that. But with that said, I mean, if I were Jim Jordan, I would probably just shut my mouth, but he couldn't help himself.
That'd be great advice. I'd love if you would take you up on that. Yeah, he believes him. Okay, whatever. They believe the guy in all of these cases. That's hardly new. We don't have to make this a big part of this, but one of the most vocal defenders so far has been Marjorie Greene, a person whose entire wackadoodle, to pick up Brett's term, worldview is based on the idea that there is a shadowy cult of powerful political people who are preying on young girls. But when she comes across someone who might fit into that group, no, I believe him, it's a witch hunt. And again, we don't know what he did or when he did it, but she is predisposed to assume that someone she likes and agrees with politically cannot obviously have done that. It's just, somewhere there's somebody, Hillary Clinton, or somebody's raping kids, I don't know who. But yeah, they're of course gonna believe him, or they're at least imply. It's, at the end of the day, it's a sexual harassment, sexual assault claim. They don't care about that. They've been very clear and very consistent about that. They can change every once in a while.
It's literally a sex trafficking claim. It is literally an accusation of sex trafficking of a minor. That is literally what QAnon. Exactly.
But it doesn't matter. Okay. They don't care about that. They didn't care about Epstein. They don't care about Trump stuff. They don't care about any of the specific ones. And to pretend, just recently with Cuomo's scandal, the hosts were all pretending, oh yes, no, now we take all of this stuff very seriously. Got to believe the women and all of that. And then they go right back to, no, we're just gonna have him on to talk about it. Tucker Carlson, so confused about this story, arguably could have reached out to the journalist who'd written it for some details, or perhaps a contact at the DOJ or something. No, we should only bring on the victim to lose his mind on camera.
Yeah, and to Tucker Carlson, the story is not that complicated. I read it within a 4-minute break on the show yesterday. It's pretty straightforward. You just have to read. You have to read the article. But sometimes that can be really difficult to do, with all the busy schedule stuff that he's got going on. Anyway, with that said, we should take a break. But when we come back, we're not quite finished with this story. We're gonna tackle it from a different angle because apparently there was a lot of disdain for Matt Gaetz within the Trump administration. We'll give you the details on some leaked texts and more when we come back.
I'm old enough that I remember when Captain Crunch put the berries in there.
Yay, crunch berries!
And I was like, ooh, the fake berries.
Remember?
We're gonna try that.
We did a story back in the day about how a woman sued, General Mills.
She'd been eating it for 4 years, believing that it was actual berries.
Yeah. She's like, these aren't real berries at all. Yeah. I'm like, I got news for you. Captain Crunch isn't really a captain or a person. Joining me now, legendary whistleblower and American hero, Edward Snowden. First question is, hey, where are you?
I'm in my apartment in Moscow.
All of a sudden, in the studio, Jim Gaffigan, everybody.
Mental illness is, completely undiagnosed in our society.
It's not about a particular administration. It's about a broken system of power, and through that, really, the instrumentalization of a system of not justice, but injustice.
People understand whether they claim to deny climate change or not. Our collective house is in crisis. We're also dealing with the legacy of 40 years of economic policies that have made people's lives more precarious.
Sometimes you gotta force people into their humanity. Sometimes you have to shake people into empathy.
Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us in the studio.
Healthcare is a basic human right, and we are fighting for basic human rights.
In order to actually achieve that vision of everyone having access to the same resources and getting to determine the outcome of their life, we have a lot of work to do, and it needs to start right now.
Here's something you may not know. When you deposit your money in a big bank, it doesn't just sit, safe and secure, in a vault. Instead, your money could end up building oil pipelines, mining for coal, or drilling in the Arctic. So if you're concerned about the planet, give your money something good to do. Make the move to green with Aspiration's fossil fuel-free account and join the thousands each week who are switching to save their dollars and save the planet at the same time.
Welcome to the Damage Report. I'm John Iadarola. This is gonna be a big one.
What Donald Trump has done as president has cut taxes for the wealthy and made life better for rich people. But he's made life worse for poor people.
We're making America great again by throwing more money at the military to destroy other countries because that makes us great instead of investing it in ourselves.
That it's Donald Trump and it's Stephen Miller. The choosing is based on wanting to create cruel and inhumane conditions to scare other people away from ever coming to the United States.
The opportunity to make money off of tragedy is the American way.
There is only one place to put garbage people: in the trash.
We've never had so much access to so much information with so little idea of what the hell is going on.
What does enforcing our borders have to do with traumatizing children? Absolutely nothing.
I think a sane person could say the current situation we have right now is radical. But what we're doing is literally making the world more like hell. That's a warning sign.
ShopTYT.com now has books. One of them is Ryan Grimm's book, We've Got People. That's a saying that AOC said, they've got money, we've got people. It's the best tracing of the AOC victory I've seen anywhere. It's the most accurate, and it's got great details. The book actually goes all the way back to Jesse Jackson and how he's the original Bernie Sanders. If you wanna know how we're gonna win going forward, those lessons are super important, and they're in Ryan's book. So check it out right now at ShopTYT.com.
We found the perfect person to lead the army, Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
Welcome back to TYT. I am gonna pull a Cenk Uygur and read one more member comment right now, and it's from you. I'm honest. You caught my attention with your handle. Your mom is in recovery mode. Writes in and says, "Can we all take a second to appreciate that calling a 17-year-old girl a 17-year-old woman is a massive red flag for how creepy he is?" I would agree with you, although even I make that mistake, and it's just like. Honestly, when I do it, I misspeak, right? Like it's hard to like really process the fact that this is a minor that we're talking about. But he's creepy, like there's no question about it. I just think that maybe that's not the best reason to point out how creepy he really is. Speaking of creepy, we're not the only ones who have issues with Matt Gaetz. Apparently there were some former Trump aides and GOP officials who also didn't like him. And we know about this through leaked text, so. As so-called Gaetzgate started trending on Twitter, former Trump aides and GOP officials started basically dunking on Matt Gaetz in a private group text. And this group text was obtained by Business Insider. And so, of course, we're gonna read you what some of those texts had to say. Now, one former Trump aide who was on the text chain with 18 current and former GOP and White House sources shared this with Business Insider, and here's what they were saying. The former Trump aides aren't necessarily happy to see the 3-term lawmaker in trouble, but they feel a little vindicated, a former White House staffer told Insider. Oh, they feel vindicated. What is that about? Well, for instance, one former White House staffer said this: "He's the meanest person in politics." Now, remember, we're not talking about leftists. We're not talking about progressives. We're not even talking about Democrat, like liberal Democrats. We're talking about conservatives, people who worked in the Trump White House, the very same administration that Matt Gaetz like could not stop himself from defending. He loved Trump, was certainly a Trump bootlicker and loyalist. But apparently there were people within the White House that were not fans of Matt Gaetz. Republican leadership, one former congressional aide wrote, "will likely watch him completely implode in a matter of days without having to do a thing." So I have more to share with you, John, but I wanted to get some of your thoughts first.
The prediction that he could implode within a couple of days is an interesting one. I wonder how much we could possibly learn during that time if the investigation is ongoing. Maybe if the investigation has been concluded, then someone from the DOJ might come out and make that clear. Maybe he can do a bunch more media hits that'll make him look really bad. That's certainly possible. In terms of him being the meanest person in politics, as you point out, people who work in the Trump White House said that. They work for Trump, and they think Matt Gaetz is the meanest guy in politics. I don't know. Look, I think that there are a lot of negative qualities that sort of just scream from every word and action that he engages in. Mean isn't the one that I find to be most important or most worrying. Right. There's some of the other allegations about him in terms of like why he's in politics, what actually he wants, what he does, his obligation to his constituents to do work. That sort of stuff I feel is more important potentially.
Well, okay, real quick, with the statement coming from that congressional aide about Matt Gaetz imploding, I don't know how true that is, but the way that I read it was, oh, these are people who are looking for Matt Gaetz to implode, right? Sure. And I think that that's fascinating, and I wish we knew why. I wish we knew more details. The accusation of meanness, I agree with you. It's not the worst accusation, especially when you consider the Trump administration. However, I want to know why. I wish we had more context into why it is that they seem to have so much disdain for him. One former Trump White House aide also wrote, "Good riddance. It sounds like he let whatever BS power he thought he had go to his head, and he thought himself above the law."
But yeah, he's the first politician to do that.
Yeah, I know. Look, there's definitely a lack of self-awareness here, right? Especially when you've worked for the Trump White House. And Trump certainly believed that he was above the law. He was treated as if he was above the law until the very end when, there were some issues with what he was encouraging people to do. There's also some, fraud issues related to his taxes. We'll see if that actually plays out with robust consequences in the end. But yeah, there are plenty of politicians, especially on the right, who seem to think that they're above the law. So there's something else at play, and that's what I'm really, really curious about.
I would love to know. I really wish that I could sit down very briefly and then never speak to these people again. What their issue with him is. Like he seems, obviously I despise him. Seems awful. Is a total tool. But from their point of view, isn't Matt Gaetz like what this whole thing is about? Like, don't they just want an army of plastic-faced Matt Gaetz that just go on Fox News to own the libs? They don't do anything. They're fine with whatever, proto-authoritarian takes over, doing whatever they want to the government, to our democracy. Like, I really, is the issue just a personal thing? Is it a comment that he made? Do they actually wish that he was doing more work? I would find that to be a positive thing. Yeah, I really wish that I wish there was more substance to the critiques than just, yeah, that guy sucks. I hope he, goes to jail over this.
So let's put out some theories. And my main theory is that despite the fact that it looks as though there's like this united front in pushing the Republican Party toward Trumpism, I think that internally, behind closed doors, the old guard absolutely hates that, right? I think that, these staffers, these former White House aides, these are people who didn't want the Republican Party to pivot over to this pretty disgusting brand of Trumpism. And Matt Gaetz is really a big symbol of that type of culture within the GOP. So I think that they can't publicly say this stuff, right? Because this is what the base is. This is what the base loves, and they can't speak out against it. That's honestly career suicide for them. But I think that internally, the way that they really feel is that this new, I hesitate to say new, but this Trumpish culture that has really overpowered the Republican Party is uncomfortable for them. They don't necessarily agree with it, and it could come with consequences for the GOP eventually. Actually, it did. I mean, with the Republicans no longer in power. So maybe that's what's really fueling it. But there could also be some personal issue as well. Who knows?
Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah. All right. You know what? Let's take a break. And when we come back, we've got a giant story to share with you about the details in Biden's infrastructure proposal. We had shared some preliminary details with you all last week, but now we have more concrete figures on just how much the Biden administration plans on spending and where they plan on spending it. We'll get that story in for you and more when we come back. Come right back.
You're about to watch some behind the scenes footage of the Young Turks.
Ooh.
Now, these are partial videos. If you want to get all of them, you become a member, go to tyt.com/join, and you'll get all the behind the scenes of me, Anna, John, JR, a little bit reality show like tyt.com/join, and enjoy this.
You know what you're seeing behind me? Jersey, hold. Watch me flip this camera. However I flip it. Do I flip it like this? No, I just took a picture. I'm bitzing right now.
What?
Behind the scenes.
Oh, okay. For members? I don't have my face on.
She doesn't have her face on, folks. Oh, that's JR's ass right there.
You can't take 5 minutes off, can you?
No, I can't, Johnny Pie. I said it was live stream,
but I was lying. It's not a live stream. It's just for members.
Bitsy, this is my cat. You know what his name is? Kiki Cat.
Animals are innocent.
Control room and the insanity is obviously there.
Right now, as you can see, I'm directing or tech directing.
I'm so happy to be here.
This is what like a Labor Day beard looks like for Jank. Man, you're a Young Turks viewer if you recognize me like this.
Oh, thank you. You are the one person in my life I would love to meet.
What's going on, guys? This is a Bitsy or a BTS or behind the scenes with Hassan Piker, AKA Woke Bay.
Oh, hi, I didn't see you there.
I have finished my show, The Damage Report, and now I get into a really awkward time of the day.
When I'm sitting, the control room is right there. So I can see Bart.
And this is the Pittsburgh office, by the way. Referred to often as the boiler room.
You see how it's ripped? Is it super unprofessional to wear that at a business meeting? Or am I like cool, rebel?
I just finished doing the power panel and I'm fired up.
What do you do for TYT?
Not a whole lot.
If you're frantically tweeting at us that something's broken, thank you, because I'm fixing it.
And thank you for being a TYT member.
Super last thing, because there's always got to be a super last thing. Oh, that was disastrous. This has been behind the scenes, behind the scenes.
We're gonna do a little thing we like to call Weekly World News. Weekly World News.
I cull stories from around the globe, stories that aren't covered on the main show or aren't covered enough, and I turn it into a 5-question quiz for Dave and Steve. All right, do we have our answers? A from Dave and C from Steve. And the correct answer is B, an oil tanker that sank off the coast of China. Okay, we have one answer of B and one answer of C. What is the correct answer? It is, of course, A, an airplane wing walking stunt gone wrong. Okay, we have an answer of A from Dave and C from Steve. The correct answer is B. We have an answer of B and C. What is the correct answer in true Weekly World News tradition? It's A.
Come on.
Taking the bear out for ice cream.
That can't possibly be true. We're terrible today. Just terrible.
When news is breaking and when you need Brett Ehrlich, it's time. When news breaks, when news is breaking and you like, when news is breaking and you need Brett Ehrlich, it's time for Breaking News with Brett Ehrlich. This is Breaking News with Brett Ehrlich.
Climate is changing fundamentally, extremely, and non-linearly. It's becoming worse now. It's not when the levees burst that is the problem. It's in the anticipation of that.
So I hope every human being is safe. And by human beings, I do not include multinational corporations, especially the ones that started climate change in the first place.
What we're currently doing right now in cutting emissions is clearly not enough. There will be ramifications to what Trump is doing. I don't want people to suffer, but I feel like there's going to be a lot of suffering because we have an imbecile as our leader.
Welcome back to TYT, everyone. Anna Kasparian and John Idarola with you. John, what were you guys talking about on the damage report today? Great time to do a quick plug.
I had Brett Ehrlich, and Wednesdays are big news Wednesdays on the damage report. We had to delve into a really big story, that Matt Gaetz story, and all of the different insanity, both that he's facing, that he's brought in himself, all the context of the weird things he's said and done, his vote against the human trafficking law. He was literally the only person in Congress to vote against it. There was a lot of that, but also the infrastructure bill and a few other things too. A mask burning party. That sounds like fun. All of that will be uploaded today to our YouTube channel.
Yes, the culture wars rage on. But for now, let's talk a little bit more about the infrastructure bill because the Biden administration has released some more details about it, and we have a better grasp on where his priorities are. So earlier, we had shared some preliminary details about the Biden administration's proposal to beef up the United States infrastructure. This is an effort to modernize the US infrastructure, focus on converting things over to renewable energies. And this is also coupled with the fact that there should be the creation of millions of jobs. Yes, they're construction jobs. Yes, they're short-term jobs, but you're likely to see this being framed, if not by the Biden administration, by reporters as this New Deal type effort to kind of get the US economy back on track for ordinary Americans. We know the economy is doing real well for people at the very top, even during a global pandemic. Now, it comes with a $2 trillion price tag. When we had initially reported this story to you guys, we mentioned that the price tag was $3 trillion. But what it appears is gonna happen is they're gonna come with a infrastructure bill that would be proposing $2 trillion in spending. And then there would be a second bill that would help with things like universal child care, paid family leave. It would make the child tax credits that just passed under the recent relief bill permanent. And that would again have a price tag of about $1 trillion. I don't know if I agree with the strategy of trying to pass two separate bills. I think that might have some political capital issues with it, but we'll talk about that later. For now, let's focus on what the infrastructure bill includes. It would rebuild 20,000 miles of roads, which I don't know if you've been driving around in the United States recently, but we can certainly use that. It would repair 10 of the most economically important bridges, but that's not where it stops. They plan on repairing other bridges as well, but there is a focus on some of the more economically advantageous bridges. They would eliminate, and this is very important, lead pipes and service lines from the nation's water supply, which is clearly an important objective to have when you consider how dangerous lead is, especially to children as they're developing. They would shift over to clean energy sources, modernize the electric grid, possibly with weatherizing equipment, so we don't deal with what Texas recently dealt with as a result of them privatizing and deregulating their independent energy grid there. And in the process of doing all of this, it could potentially create millions of jobs. Now, Biden's administration has named this the quote, American Jobs Plan, echoing the $1.9 trillion pandemic relief bill that Biden signed into law this month, known as the American Rescue Plan. And the spending in the plan would take place over 8 years. We'll get to how Biden proposes to pay for this in just a minute. But so far, what are your thoughts, John?
Yeah, how he plans to pay for it in terms of the timeline, I don't particularly care about, except the fact that I like that it shows a willingness, as you'll get into in terms of the taxes. I think that the political implications for that being a part of the bill, in terms of how it might influence the possibility of getting Republicans on board, is the important part. In terms of what's in it, pretty much everything that's in it that I've seen, I like, and it's shocking that it's taken to this point to get it. The idea that Republicans under like unified Republican control weren't able to get probably some much smaller infrastructure bill passed. Like even just pragmatically, being able to campaign on having done that seems like it would have been a great idea, but I guess it's the government doing something for the country and they're sort of viscerally opposed to that. Yeah, the repairing of the roads is great. Every day we drive on roads. I mean, the 405, I cannot believe that someone could fly into a major US city and drive on a highway like that and think, oh, this is what America thinks of itself. And the bridges obviously is a huge safety concern. Some of the electrification of school buses, and we talked on TDR about the establishment of a 500,000 strong EV charging network. That's great, as you pointed out. The lead pipe removal, finally getting that done again. How could that not have been done already? All of this is good. It's just that for all the good you can fit in your $2 trillion bill, arguably you can fit about twice as much in a $4 trillion bill. And when we're talking about this being over the course of 10 years, it doesn't seem irrational. Maybe we're not gonna hit the AOC request of 10 trillion, but Joe Manchin was asking for more than what Biden is currently targeting. And so what we talked about in TDR, and I'm curious in your opinion, is the process of actually getting this passed, reconciling the House and the Senate versions. Do we think that it's likely that they might produce something more like what we'd want?
I think that, well, I mean, you're asking one of the most pessimistic hosts on this network. I don't think that a single Republican is going to vote in favor of this legislation. They would have to do this through reconciliation. I think that discussions about policy, especially right now, end up getting, I guess, bogged down with annoying procedural debates, and that's gonna continue being a problem. So they might be able to pass this through reconciliation. I don't know how much of a problem people like Sinema and Manchin plan on being in the Senate. But what I do know is that, there needs to be something done in regard to the filibuster, because this goes beyond the infrastructure bill. It goes beyond, the other bill that Biden's planning on rolling out. If they want to do anything to reform our democracy, which is an incredibly important agenda item, they're not going to be able to do that through reconciliation. They would have to do that through reforming the filibuster, and in the very least, reforming the filibuster. And I don't know if the will to do that is there. I know that Biden has hinted that he's willing to do it, but right now, in terms of actual, steps forward with that, we haven't seen anything yet. The one thing that I do want to caution people about is the way that this proposal is being framed. I think this is a good first step, but this certainly is not like a holistic approach to the economic woes that Americans are facing right now. now. Because when you frame this as, ooh, it's like the New Deal, it's just an exaggerated claim to make.
Yeah,
I think that it's influenced by the New Deal. But remember, Franklin Delano Roosevelt not only focused on rebuilding and revolutionizing the infrastructure here in the United States, he reformed the banking industry, and he had no problem with really increasing taxes on the wealthy. In this case, yes, there is a proposal to increase, like for instance, the corporate tax rate, but Biden is not proposing to increase the corporate tax rate to what it was before the Trump administration, which was 35%. He's proposing to go from 21% to 28%. And I mean, it's just, in my opinion, if you're really trying to create a more equitable system in the US, going like halfway between Trump and what the tax rate used to be, it just doesn't go far enough. Now, I wanted to share this video with you guys real quick. Although it's not really quick. I know it's a longer video, but the Smithsonian puts out these incredible documentaries. They're titled America in Color. And they did a great documentary about the 1930s and the influence of FDR. And there were flaws, don't get me wrong. There were certainly flaws with the New Deal, which we'll talk about in a second. Flaws in which it looks like Biden tried to correct in his proposal pertaining to race. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, take a look at what happened during the New Deal era.
Roosevelt tries everything he can to make good on his campaign promise of work for those who need it. He forms the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, and offers jobs to 250,000 young men. They earn $30 a month, 25 of which is sent back home. They reshape the American landscape with new roads, 800 parks, and 3 billion trees. In 1935, another New Deal project, the Grand Coulee Dam, is the biggest building site in the world, employing 11,000 men. In Washington state, they excavate nearly 63 million tons of earth and rock. A conveyor belt 2 miles long transports the debris. And some 24 million tons of concrete pour into the Columbia Basin to dam the river.
I'm sorry, but the working men of that era, they can get it. I'm just gonna say that real quick.
As soon as I saw that arm, I looked at the preview view and I like, I knew she was gonna respond, and she did. You did not fail, Kasparian.
Apologies. But you can see the influence of the New Deal era in what Biden is proposing here. But it certainly does not go far enough, right? So there's that issue. However, I do want to give Biden credit because the one area where it really has become a stain on FDR's leadership. It was the fact that the New Deal era didn't really consider Black workers. In fact, it kind of left them behind. And so Biden's proposal very much puts racial equality front and center. And I think that's an important part of this as well. There shouldn't be a difference in how white workers are treated versus Black workers. And he wanted to make sure that that was a part of the legislation. So that's positive as well. So John, did you want to say anything else?
Yeah, I think that as a component of it is very important to bear in mind, what the priorities of the federal government and regular people were back then. Almost certainly the worker with the nice arms, probably a hardcore racist. Let's just keep it real. He was almost certainly a hardcore racist, but he probably was. Yes, so that's good. Okay. And then also
it's the 1930s.
Exactly. Yeah, no, look at him. Come on. Anyway, I love that they focused on that. But also, we know that Biden likes this idea that he's gonna be bolder than Obama and all of that. And that it's the second New Deal. But I'm just doing rough numbers, and I'm not an expert on this, but as a percentage of the GDP, it is based on the different sources I'm looking at least 1/5 the size, possibly 1/40th the size each year than the New Deal. So significant, and that's good. But I don't know, if you're gonna compare it to that, I think you gotta get that number up higher. And if you really want that, then why are you so hesitant to like engage with people like AOC and others that think that we should incorporate what is being termed, I'm seeing a lot of talk about this, the human infrastructure element, and that we should prioritize that as much as the physical infrastructure element.
Yeah, that's such a great point, John. And look, one other thing that I would caution the audience about, or pay attention to this because this is important. You know, it's not just about how much spending you're willing to commit to. It's also about how that spending will be used. And I'm not even talking about the objectives. I'm talking about, is this going to turn into some sort of giveaway to private companies, right? And we've seen that problem in California with the construction of affordable housing. I mean, there was a Los Angeles City Council member who got arrested by the FBI because he was engaging in a pay-to-play scheme where these developers were getting these like sweetheart deals, of course, paid for by California's taxpayers to build affordable housing. And what they would do is they would inflate the costs of construction. And of course, we're footing the bill for that. And so I got a little worried when I saw that like investors, I was reading some of these financial publications, and they're just like, these investors are getting real excited about what this means for the stock market. And it's like, that's not a good sign. So, but look, I don't want to be too harsh. I just think that that's something that we should be paying attention to moving forward. And so far, based on where his priorities are, it seems like he has good intentions. Not big enough. I certainly think that it could be a problem to try to pass multiple big agenda items through multiple bills. I thought that this was all going to be combined into one piece of legislation, but that's not the case. And so we'll see what happens. But I think anyone who thinks working with Republicans is feasible is being incredibly naive. They're going to be a problem, even though Biden has committed to keeping the corporate tax rate low, really lower than what it was before Trump.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, at the time that they were debating the Trump tax cuts, that's what we were saying. Someday, some centrist Dem is gonna be like, I raised the taxes, but in the end, from the perspective of 10 years ago, it's still a cut. They still got their cut. It didn't matter which party was in charge in that respect. And in hindsight, I feel a little bit stupid because Brett and I had a bit of a debate this morning about whether you might be able to get some Republicans on board because it's an infrastructure bill. It's gonna put a lot of money and create a lot of jobs in their districts. But it is, at the end of the day, as he points out, going to be funded via tax increases, and there's virtually no Republicans and potentially even some Democrats that you're gonna lose as a result of that. Even if they're not bringing the taxes back up to where they're at pre-Trump, and they're possibly reimposing certain sorts of loopholes and things like that, you're still gonna lose a lot of politicians, no matter how much economic stimulus it gives to their district, especially when the new strategy is vote against it and then just say that you voted for it for the good stuff. That's what they've started doing for the stimulus bill, for the COVID bill. They can just do that for the infrastructure bill as well.
Yeah, no, you're right. Well, Brett's right. I don't know why you were debating with that point. That's actually a really good point.
It's mostly me.
No, but I mean, Mitch McConnell has already come out and he's like, we don't really like the tax, no go with the tax cuts, tax increases. So there's no working with them. I mean, even when Obama offered like additional tax cuts to Republicans in the stimulus bill that he had passed, right? They're like, no, we don't want to work with him. Okay, so let's not make that mistake again, okay? And let's please do something about the filibuster. Otherwise, any discussion about the PRO Act, any discussion about the For the People Act, which would reform our democracy, all of that stuff, it means nothing. It means nothing unless Democrats are willing to do what it takes to get rid of this ridiculous, arbitrary process in the Senate. So we'll see where that goes. And for now, we're gonna move on. Just do one more story with you, if you don't mind. Okay,
I don't.
Great. All right, so let's do one more story because I know you have some thoughts about this. You covered it on your show, and I wanted to have you elaborate a little bit. So, Student loan debt continues to be a massive problem in the United States. This is debt that students cannot get rid of even if they file for bankruptcy. And there have been growing calls for the Biden administration to forgive student loan debt. Now, Chuck Schumer is continuing with these efforts to really present himself as this progressive and a man of the people. And so speaking at a press conference recently, the majority leader called on his supporters to pressure Congress, pressure lawmakers to cancel student loans. Let's hear what he had to say.
Folks listening, whether you have the debt, have a friend who has the debt, believe it's the right thing, we're asking you, email, call, write President Joseph Robinette Biden and tell him you want this done. We're trying to get as many people to contact the White House as possible. And frankly, we told this to Joe Biden and he said, go ahead, let it rip. So let's show him what kind of support there is out there for this great plan that Elizabeth, Bob, and I, and many, many others are pushing. Let's get this done.
Oh. Wow, what a tactician, really. Yeah.
And what a cool individual. Anyway, I don't like the posing at the end. Also, based on the conversation, if that was an accurate reflection of the conversation that Senator Schumer had with Joe Biden, F Joe Biden. He's like, Schumer's like, yeah, no, the American people really want to cut student loan debt. In fact, they're going to start to make it clear to you. And Biden says, yeah, let it rip. What are you talking about? First of all, you can just look at the polls. You already know what the American people think about it. And I would also say, why do we have to do a whole nother campaign? You said you would do it. You knew how much we wanted it. It was one of the things that led young people to support you in the first place. I'm all for people contacting their elected officials. We ask them to do it all the time. I kind of feel like in this case, they shouldn't have to though. I think that Joe Biden knows damn well what people want. And even if he doesn't, Warren and Schumer do. I don't know about Menendez, but those two definitely. Why don't they talk to Joe Biden? Why don't they put some pressure on him? You're the leader of the Senate Dems. You can cause all sorts of problems for Joe Biden and his agenda if that's what you wanted. If you really are prioritizing this, and he's been consistent. He's been talking about it for months now. Maybe he actually does want $50,000 to be canceled. But if so, don't say, I want it, I'm your champion. Now you guys go and actually make it happen. And presumably if it doesn't happen, well, it was on you guys because I told you to go talk to him. No, and it's not on us. We voted, we got him elected, and by the way, got you to be majority leader. Now you do your job and talk to Joe Biden and make it actually happen. And if we can't do 50,000 right off the bat, we know he can do 10,000 in his own addled mind. What he can do with the stroke of a pen is at least 10,000, do that. And then we can return and talk about the 40,000. How about that? How about a little show of good faith on this topic from Joe Biden? Because as of right now, he has the exact same position as Donald Trump when it comes to canceling student loan debt. At least in terms of this. I understand they've done a couple of billion for special programs, blah, 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 don't tweet me. I'm talking about the actually canceling a significant portion of the $1 trillion+ in student loan debt that we have outstanding.
No, don't. And also to the people who are like, no, but don't you get it? Biden is going to propose this great indentured servitude bill that forces you to work in a specific field. And then maybe in 10 years, if you're lucky and the right administration is in charge, they might cancel your student loan debt, but probably not. No, I don't want to hear about that. I don't care. Like that's not a solution, right? The whole point is to give people the economic freedom that comes along with doing away with this ridiculous student loan debt, most of which is being doled out and processed by the federal government. And they charge interest. That is a form of bringing in revenue for the federal government because they charge interest. And I think that's one of the motivating factors for why we haven't really seen an administration willing to discharge student loan debt. But I agree with you. I mean, you said everything that needed to be said. Chuck Schumer, not a great debater, but certainly a great delegator. And I'm busy. I don't have time to do his job. He needs to do his job, okay? He's got a tremendous amount of power as the Senate Majority Leader, okay? The person who served as a Senate Majority Leader not too long ago, Mitch McConnell, apparently understands how to flex his power. It's just unfortunate that right now we don't have much of that with Democratic leadership. So that's where we're at. But great points all around. Thank you, John, and everyone.
Glad we did that last story.
Me too. I saw your tweet about it, or at least the Damage Report's tweet about it, and I was like, I do want to talk about this with John, and you delivered. So, and you guys can watch more of John's commentary over at the Damage Report. Make sure you subscribe. And John, have an awesome night. See you soon.
Thank you. You too. Have fun with Nando.
All right. When we come back, Nando will be joining me for hour 2. See you then.
Do you know what we do online these days? Everything. You know that. You're watching the show online. You do your banking, credit cards, passwords, all online. So do you need to be safe? Of course. It's not an option. PureVPN helps protect you online, and they actually do it for up to 10 devices, which is great. And they've got deals right now. That's why I like this sponsor. I want you to go check it out. tyt.com/purevpn. Make sure you protect yourself online. It's really important. tyt.com/purevpn.
My name is Cassandra Hanks. I've been with TYT for 3 years. I am a video editor and a photographer. A main perk for working for TYT is, as being their main photographer, I get to photograph and sometimes meet some of the celebrities that come through. Susan Sarandon was amazing because she brought her dog Penny. Tom Morello is probably my favorite because I love rock music. Meeting people like Joss Whedon and Quentin Tarantino has been some of the reasons why I got into filmmaking and photography was like a dream come true.
All right, well, the Young Turks special election day coverage dropping.
An amazing power panel.
Look at this panel. You want to talk about power?
Like a smart Destiny's Child.
We're all too strong. We spun a revolution. Yes, another one.
Aren't you excited?
Wow.
And then outsiders in the country are right there on this panel with the obvious exception of Gunn.
Why is he lying? Because these are acts that you can commit with impunity.
Most of us are usually in boxer shorts underneath.
I went with the pants today.
This is the first ever power panel with Donald Trump as president.
We have elected the top Twitter troll in the country.
We have to stop pretending that race is not an issue in this country.
Now keep in mind, racism had gone away until Barack Obama brought it back.
That's right. They want to protect life so much that they want to ensure that insurance companies don't cover your maternity care.
I've been a fan of TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years.
I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning.
Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring him. There's nobody there to say, you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're gonna get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
That's right, we're back. You're watching the Young Turks, Anna Kasparian and Nando Vila with you. Nando, how are you?
I'm doing well, I love doing the Wednesday shows with you because it feels like a taste of Saturday.
Our weekend show for Jacobin, which we do every Saturday morning. So make sure you guys check that out. It's over at youtube.com/JacobinMag. We go live every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And really it's more of an interview and deep dive show. So Nando and I will pick topics. We will pretty much ruin our Friday nights in writing those topics and researching them for you guys. And then we put a show together. And I love doing it. It's just, I love hosting it. I don't necessarily love working on it because it's so time consuming, but it is a really great learning experience as well. So check that out. All right. Well, one of the topics that we should probably talk about on weekends, and we're gonna talk about it now, has to do with robots and automation. And there's like this celebratory tone in the media regarding what Boston Dynamics has recently developed. Let's give you some details on that. Boston Dynamics has developed a new robot that they're calling Stretch. It's meant to automate the movement of goods and packages within warehouses. And this is certainly a little different from what Boston Dynamics has put out before. If you've seen that like robotic dog looking thing, that was, there we go, that's what I'm talking about. It's in the B-roll as we speak. That's also a Boston Dynamics robot. And a lot of these previous robots meant for automation were really out of reach for companies that would literally need to shift things around within their warehouses. They would have to have an infrastructure in place in order to accommodate those robots. That's not the case with Stretch. So the robot is called Stretch and looks relatively dull for a Boston Dynamics creation. It's not modeled after humans or animals and instead aims to be as practical as possible. It has a square mobile base containing a set of wheels, a perception mast with cameras and other sensors, and a huge robotic arm with 7 degrees of freedom, which will essentially take jobs away from people working at these warehouses. And that's really what this story should be about, but that's not what anyone's focusing on. Also, it has a suction pad array on the end that can grab and move boxes up to 15 pounds in weight. So let's take a quick look at a demo of what this robot looks like and how it works. So Boston Dynamics is alleging that this robot can move or shift up to 800 boxes per hour, comparable to a human. Some speculate that that's not necessarily true. But really, Nando, what I wanted to talk to you about is, in this environment where we do not have organized labor, automation can be pretty devastating. Whereas if you have a situation in which labor has a seat at the table, they're able to negotiate, automation could actually be great. It could free up their time to focus on other more fulfilling aspects of the company. But we're not in that situation, at least not in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, that video was terrifying, by the way. But you're absolutely right. I mean, their technology need not be a destructive force in our lives. It could be an emancipatory force in our lives. For lack of a better way of explaining it, the Star Trek vision of the future is one in which technological advancement frees humanity from the need to do drudgery and awful work, and basically everyone in the world can live lives of comfort and leisure. And then the Star Trek people just do that stuff by choice. They don't need to be out there exploring the universe. They do it just because they want to. But that's not the world we live in. We live under capitalism, and we live under a system of hierarchy and domination. And in that context, what it is technological advancement is just to displace workers from one industry to another, which is always very traumatic and very difficult because it's not as easy for someone to just change their career, change their lives, uproot their physical location. Often, it is one of the great ironies of our time that under capitalism we've seen technological advancement, the likes of which human history has never really seen. But we are unfortunately working longer hours than ever. It has not led to the freedom that we really should. It's, if you look at the amount of hours people are working in the day, the amount of precarity that people experience in their lives, it's totally unnecessary. It's really totally unnecessary. And it comes down to who owns the machines, who owns the robots, who owns this technology. Do a handful of wealthy people own it? Because if that's the case, they'll just use the technology to enrich themselves and to dominate the rest of us, to keep us beaten down. If we all owned the technology and we all owned the machines, we would use them for our benefit. We would not have to work in Amazon fulfillment centers ever again. Because we would just, live lives of comfort because all our material needs would be taken care of. But that's not the world we live in today. We just have to get there somehow.
Right. No, and that's exactly right. And it's not just about who owns the technology, but who owns the means of production. And so if you have a co-op where decisions are made democratically, well, yeah, this type of technology could be fantastic, right? You could vote on how you use the technology and what your colleagues can spend their time doing. They could spend time innovating, maybe finding solutions to other issues that they've come across with the business model of the company, right? But that's not the case here. We're living in a investor-based economic system, right? Where you have these investors looking for a return on their investment. And one of the ways that they're usually able to secure that return on investment is by cutting costs. And how do they cut costs? Well, they get people fired, laid off. They find ways to pay people less for the work that they're doing. And that's the environment that we're living under. And if you're living under that culture, that system, these robots and this technology is not seen as an upside to you, the worker. It's seen as an upside to the shareholders, the investors who, again, are just looking to cut costs, increase profits, and get a nice fat return on their investment, really.
Well, Uber is a perfect example of this. Uber is a remarkable company and a very much a test case, I think, in terms of like how insane the system we live in is today. Uber loses like $6 billion a year in net losses. Like, I don't understand how that is even possible. Like, what are they spending all their money on? But despite that fact that Uber loses literally billions of dollars a year in God knows how, investors still pump money into Uber and still see it as a worthy investment because they understand that at some point Uber will just employ a fleet of self-driving cars that will, take us to and fro. But I mean, obviously that's a very big and risky bet, but they're willing to lose in the short term billions and billions and billions of dollars a year and prop up this company artificially in order to then own that, what you described, that mean of production, which is, the fleet of self-driving cars, which are going to take us to and fro, and then extract profits from there. That's it. That's it. That's their game. Uber does not work as a sort of driver model. It just really does not. There's a reason why taxi cabs are more expensive than Ubers, because that's what you need to make, that's what they cost, undercutting those prices lead to literally, I think they lost $6 billion last year. And I think they lost something like $7 billion the year before. It's like, I don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't understand it either, especially when you consider the fact that Uber is not purchasing or leasing a fleet of vehicles for their employees to drive. Employees are driving their own vehicle. Like you're right. Where does the money go?
I don't understand.
Effectively just an app. It's just an app, really.
Yeah.
Like they developed an app.
What's like on the high end of how many like engineers they need to have to oversee the app? Like 200, like that's all it is. What else do they need? I don't get it. I guess maybe, okay, some marketing expenses, blah, blah. This is $6 billion a year in losses, like, net losses, expenses minus revenues. I don't understand, like, that means that their like expenses every year have to be like in the tens of billions, and I don't understand on what. I really don't, where they're just like throwing money into a trash can and lighting it on fire. I don't get it.
And they're certainly not paying for benefits for their drivers. No. In fact, they succeeded in their campaign to crush workers in California with the passage of Prop 22. So there's like a whole new classification of workers that aren't even really considered employees. So as a result, Uber doesn't have to provide any benefits to these drivers who are bringing in whatever money they do bring in, and I guess squander irresponsibly to the point where they're losing billions of dollars every year. But the point here is the automation, the technology is not the problem. It's the system under which we're operating that makes it a problem, because the individuals who actually, work at these companies, build the wealth for the executives at these companies. They're not the ones who have a say on how these robots will be deployed, how they'll be used, and ultimately what their fate as workers will be. So for anyone who's celebrating this in the media because, technology is cool, just understand that there are consequences to it if you're in a situation that we're experiencing here in the United States.
Well, what they're actively.
One other thing.
Yeah.
One quick thing I wanted to say, I am curious to see how, I want to differentiate how this plays out in the United States versus some of the, Scandinavian countries, for instance, that have strong labor unions, because I would venture to say that there are going to be potentially different outcomes. And there is a reason why, online security and online privacy tends to be taken a little more seriously in European countries versus the United States. But with that said, what were you gonna say, Nando?
Well, no, just that that the like with the media that you were talking about, like how they're celebrating this, they are actively developing AI to like generate news articles. Like they're coming for you too, bro. Like this is not, you think like you're safe because you have to do like some sort of like knowledge-based job, but and those workers at the Amazon fulfillment center are just like mindless drones who have to package stuff. But the takes are going to be algorithmically generated very soon, and you're going to be out of a job as well. So yeah,
they're already testing it out. Yeah, they're already testing it out with some of the videos that they play in those, Hill articles. Have you ever come across those? I'm just like, Is this a person or is this a robot? Anyway, but no, and I'm kidding. They're actually real people. Broadcasting there is a skill involved in it, but that's a completely different discussion for a different time. Yeah, well, I would like to think. But with that said, we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, we have more to get to, including shenanigans from Amazon. Who are their Twitter ambassadors and what kind of nonsense are they engaging in? You do not wanna miss this story. Come right back.
Damn it, they failed us. And if you're not angry about that, Michael, and any of you out there, then you're damn wrong, because you should be angry. Young Turks.
It was genuine. He was mad.
Cenk Uygur, known online as one of the Young Turks, isn't afraid to throw some punches.
3, 2, 1, fade up.
Cenk the Turk Uygur.
What kind of TV station is this? The whole point is for me to yell and scream and tell you what I think.
It was right out of like Wayne's World.
This guy on this little rinky-dink website is speaking truth to power.
We've been averaging 600,000 views a day, beating most of the cable shows in America.
We're the largest online news show in the world.
We're celebrating our 1 billionth view.
Television, we're coming.
More politics ahead with Cenk Uygur.
He knew that the MSNBC opportunity was an experiment.
And Phil and host beat CNN and Headline News combined. At some point, they want to give me a show.
Every single year, that comes out of our paycheck. We put it in, and you're saying we were suckers.
When you, as a host, tells someone you're interviewing to shut up, that's going to raise a red flag.
That guy needed a tall glass of shut up juice.
If President Obama's doing the wrong thing, I'm not going to tell you that he's doing the right thing so I can, quote, support him.
He says to me, "You won't believe the meeting that I just had."
The head of MSNBC talked to me.
They want him off the air.
Cenk took an incredible risk.
We're supposed to challenge the government. That's the role of the media.
The Democrats and the Republicans are here to screw you. And who on the air is saying it?
I wouldn't have done what he did.
That if I'm going to be a talk show host, I should be the biggest talk show host in the country. I don't think anyone else does it better. I don't think anyone's even close.
Before you know it, I'll be back on your TV doing an actual show. I guarantee it.
We talk about TYT Army being so strong. Usually they help us run our show. Now they're gonna help us run the country.
Like this.
It's time that we reclaim democracy for the people.
We had a huge victory for Wolfpack.
When Lincoln said this was a country by, of, and for, he said of the people, not of corporations.
Our representatives don't represent us.
Whoa, democracy.
United!
We are.
We are!
Too strong.
There's thousands of volunteers, and you can be among them. When you get the power back, oh, that feels good.
This is just the beginning.
Knock, knock.
We're coming for them!
Wolf-pack.com.
Mayweather will knock out Pacquiao. Floyd beats his wife.
Okay, I get it. You're progressive. You're looking for other progressive voices. Why? Because you want real progress to happen. You're tired of the why, regular stuff. You should be checking out the Young Turks. Why? Because who else is going to have Killer Mike talking about politics and social issues in his new TV show, Trigger Warning?
My dad wrote the story of his life. It's called Original Young Turk. It's a book on shoptyt.com. Part of the story is how I became progressive. Now, he doesn't write about that per se, but in his life story, you see, oh my God, when a community helps one another, when the government also chips in and gives you free education, anything is possible. He went from an incredibly poor olive farmer to living the American dream.
We're learning more about the shenanigans that Amazon executives have engaged in order to discourage efforts to unionize among its employees. And look, Ken Klippenstein, if there's one reporter that you need to read every time you put something out there, it's Ken Klippenstein, because he's got the scoops and he's been killing it on this Amazon story. So let's give you guys the details. Amazon deployed an army of so-called ambassadors on social media, specifically on Twitter back in 2018. And the whole point was to defend the company and clap back against progressive lawmakers like Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, they had this whole program and they even titled it Veritas. Ken Klippenstein reports in The Intercept that anticipating criticisms of worker conditions at their fulfillment centers in particular, Amazon designed Veritas to train fulfillment center workers chosen for their great sense of humor to confront critics, including policymakers, on Twitter in a blunt manner. Okay, and we do have some examples of the types of tweets they put out there. But the reason why we know about this is because someone from Amazon leaked this document to Ken Klippenstein. And the document produced as part of the pilot program in 2018 and marked Amazon.com confidential also includes examples of how its ambassadors can snarkily respond to criticisms of the company and its CEO. Several examples involve Bernie, a longtime critic of the $1 trillion firm, who has been targeted by it in recent days. It also provides examples of how to defend Bezos. And before we get to all of that, I do want to open it up to you, Nando, because as you know, as Bessemer, Alabama warehouse workers have been trying to unionize, Amazon has used all sorts of tactics to discourage them from doing so. So this really isn't that surprising.
I mean, yeah. Well, first of all, big ups to Ken Klippenstein, probably our nation's finest investigative reporter. I mean, like in terms of volume of scoops, like actual meaningful scoops, there's few reporters who generate more.
More scoops than Baskin Robbins for sure.
Oh, hey. Oh man, more scoops than his brother, the Krasensteins. I find this story to be both hilarious and also weirdly dystopian in that is anyone swayed by any of this? Like, is anyone gonna be like, read the tweets from like, Jenny at Amazon FC, who's like, you know what? I love packaging packages all day, and it's my favorite thing in the world to do. And we get great breaks. It's like the terrorist videos. Like, they're treating me very well here. And the grimness of it though is that like they're using these kind of social channels and basically, I'm assuming, buying off like potential collaborators, like these employees who are willingly like shilling for management in that sense. I mean, it's crazy. There's always going to be a percentage of the population who is going to be willing to scab or just absolutely be a turncoat against like their fellow workers and try to like, I don't know, ingratiate themselves with the bosses in a way that is like, the worst kind of teacher's pet, brown noser. And like, I wonder if because I don't think it was in the Ken Klippenstein report whether they're being paid or not. I know they were encouraged. Who knows what like stupid benefits they were given to do that. Like, maybe they get like an extra 5 minutes to go to the bathroom and do whatever their business is if they per tweet or something. But yeah, I mean, that was what was kind of depressing about it, because I assumed they were bots. And I'm sure some of them are bots, but like the fact that they're real people is more depressing than anything else.
Right, and I would want to learn a little bit more about how this all came about, right? Like, were they approached by management over at Amazon? And if they were approached about doing this, did they really feel like they had a choice? Like, can you really like consent to being part of this? Because you could say no, but I mean, it's very clear that Amazon is punitive in so many different ways. I mean, Ken Klippenstein also reported recently about how Amazon drivers had such a heavy load of work to do on a daily basis. Like, they had to deliver a high quota of packages. And as a result, they felt like they couldn't even take a break to go to the bathroom. So many of them would defecate in bags in their cars or urinate in bottles. And so obviously there's like at least some culture of fear implemented, because you don't want to lose your job, right? Especially in this economy where you have these massive companies like Amazon that are eating up all of these other smaller companies. You really don't have much of a choice. And if you live in a small town and Amazon is your only employment option, I can see how the issue of consent can become a sticky one. But we don't know. We don't know how the recruiting process went down. And you're right, there are certainly people who are willing to place their bets with sucking up to management as opposed to unifying with their fellow workers. But I do want to give you some examples of the interactions that the document laid out, just as like, hey, here's how you can respond, that type of thing. So in one instance, the document refers to a video interview Sanders tweeted. Bernie Sanders interviewing Seth King on Prime Day. Seth describes feeling so depressed working at Amazon to take his own life, right? Like, there's a worker who's considering suicide. An ambassador role-playing then responds, Senator Sanders, this job has never made me feel bad personally. If you have a job that makes you feel bad, you could leave.
Oh yeah,
so that's an example of a response. Yeah.
Yeah. You could just live in destitute poverty and starve to death rather than grind your bones to sawdust in our fulfillment centers. I mean, that's a choice. That's your choice, man. I'm sorry, you chose it.
I mean, this is Chicago school talking points, like libertarian nonsense, right? Like the whole, oh no, you live in the greatest country in the world. You get to decide your fate. You get to make your own decisions. Yeah, there's one company that you can really work at this point because it's killed every other small business. Yeah. But you can make decisions. Like, please. To give you more, at another point, Sanders is described as having tweeted about Jeff Bezos's wealth. The ambassador then replies, everyone should be able to enjoy the money they've earned / saved. It's theirs. They should be able to do with it as they please. That includes Jeff Bezos. And I mean, there's a really great, in my opinion, like Marxist response to that, which is who actually built the company, right? Who's actually creating the wealth? Who's generating the wealth for that company? Is it really Jeff Bezos, or is it all of those warehouse workers, all of those drivers, all of the workers who are being, even at $15 an hour, underpaid relative to the revenue that Amazon brings in on a yearly basis, including during a global pandemic? So maybe let's have a discussion about that. So anyway,
I mean,
it's frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, it's, but when we zoom out in the big picture, though, this Bessemer, Alabama union drive, which, we hope has to succeed, because there hasn't been a private sector union drive like this that has gotten this much attention in a long time, especially like in a working class industry. I know that the media has had several high profile kind of unionization drives, but that's in the media, therefore that's why it's covered by the media. But this is like a squarely working class union drive in the deep South, in a small town, just exactly the place where it needs to happen for it to have any meaningful ripple effect. And if it does succeed, you can imagine our politics changing pretty dramatically. If it gets defeated, it would be a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be a tough pill to swallow, but I don't want to get, first of all, I don't want to get preemptively depressed. No. Because there have already been some positive, benefits to this union drive. It's galvanized workers across the country. Now you have workers not just at Amazon fulfillment centers, but in other companies, reaching out to union leaders looking for a way to organize themselves, and that's a good sign. I think the one thing that I've noticed a change in is just like this growing awareness of class. I think that conversation was really missing nationally, and we're still we're not there yet, but it's growing. Like people are starting to really think of themselves, not based on other identifiers, but more importantly through class struggle. And really, when it comes to the material benefits of that, I really think it's important to have that focus and do so in an intersectional way, right? So at the end of the day, this is a class war, and we're talking about people who are building wealth for these individuals who are psychopaths, really. I mean, to the point where if you see that your workers are overwhelmed and they have to defecate in bags as a result, maybe don't punish them, maybe rethink your business model a little bit, and maybe you bring in a little tiny bit less in profits. But you're gonna be all right, dog. You're gonna be okay. But that's not how capitalism works. That's certainly not how Jeff Bezos and executives at Amazon work. And so they're scared, they're terrified about this effort to unionize, which brings me to the final graphic that I want to read to you guys. As Klippenstein reports, the document instructs employees not to respond to contacts about the right to unionize, one of the only 3 cases in which they're told not to respond. An example to ignore is provided. Amazon let your FC employees unionize if you have nothing to hide. So if someone says that to one of these or tweets that, the ambassadors are told just ignore it, do not respond to it. Don't draw any attention to that. So And I lied. There is one more graphic because you tweeted it. It was hilarious. So there are bots as well. And here's an example. Tim Sullivan tweeted this out. Someone with the handle OK4AT, Bert at OK4. That's an image of a guy, a personality from this YouTube channel called Dude Perfect. So they just really didn't try with this one at all, as Tim Sullivan mentions.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. You love to see it. You love to see it. God, I hope they win.
So, I know, me too. Well, we're gonna take a break, but when we come back, we'll update you on how dire the situation has become for tens of millions of Americans who need healthcare. And Bernie Sanders does have a proposal when it comes to expanding Medicare. We'll give you the details on that and more when we come back.
Magic. It's showtime. And say 45 minutes. I'm hosting today. Now I know what you're thinking, JR, your face is already perfect, but you know what? I still need to apply some makeup. I went through this process, right? A few years ago when I realized that I was gonna have to wear makeup on the show. I had to go through like finding out what my undertones were. You guys know what those are? I got my Matt Cosmetics. It says SPF 15 foundation, broad spectrum. But apparently what I have is red undertones, and I think pores are not supposed to be seen. I need all these things to be confirmed for me. These sponge things don't work for me. You gotta use your hands. This idea. That's how the magic really happens. So we're gonna go through a tutorial how to make the magic happen from beautiful to beautifuler. Let's go. I've already been moisturized. That's the first thing. But moisturization already happened. We go raw. All hands. Pick up a couple streaks. This is the guy we're putting on makeup. We got dots. There's some shiny points that generally happen. First of all, here we go. You dust here. I'm putting way too much, but you dust. Oh, get the excess off. You don't want chunky powder. There's like a T-zone, I think, right? Mine is a double T-zone. Because I went middle and another cross. Make sure your nose isn't all shiny. People get on you for it. You know, say, that's not a good point you made on there, JR. Your nose is shiny. You guys are picky like that sometimes. I think that's about it, fellas and ladies. See you guys next time. Bitsies.
This isn't Anderson Cooper. If you say some BS, I'm not simply going to let it slide and then move on to the next thing.
This is what the establishment does not understand about politics. You can change the conversation.
This is my place in that broader revolution.
We first have to fight to prove that we are human. We then have to fight for our freedom. Then we fight for our equality. And now we are fighting for our survival because your militarized police force thinks it's okay to shoot us at any point in time.
Look at what's happening in society today, and it's hard not to think about what was going on in the 50s and 60s.
We're all out here. Everybody that cares about where this country's going, we're out here.
We are going to win this fight. We are going to transform this country.
Whoever wins this primary wins the seat.
We just took down one of the top establishment Democrats in the country. Down goes Crowley. Down goes Crowley.
This is the beginning.
What do we got? We got CREEPS in the house.
Best moment of my life, I guess, would have to be when the kid was born. Like, you know, because suddenly that meant I served my purpose. Very close second, the day we sold Clerks. That changed my life. In fact, Harley wouldn't have been born if I hadn't sold Clerks. So that noise. Clerks, probably the biggest day, best day of my life. It led to everything else. I got the wife and the kid because Clerks happened. So don't tell the kid, but Clerks.
Our teachers are suffering, and we won't even cut 10% of the money going to military contractors.
The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities.
A tiny sliver of the defense budget would pay for 395,000 teachers.
We're talking about the future of the country. We're talking about the nation's youth and making sure that we are competitive globally. And the only way to do that is to make sure that we provide quality education for our young people.
everyone, welcome back to TYT. Anna Kasparian and Nando Vila with you. I wanted to plug Woke Bros, which Nando hosts with Waz every week. So check out that podcast on wherever you get your podcast. It's a really, really great weekly show, super laid back format, which I really appreciate. And then we also host a show together every Saturday morning for Jacobin. Go to youtube.com/JacobinMag and please subscribe. Check out that Saturday show. We put a lot of work behind it. All right, so Nando, why don't we talk a little foreign policy? You ready?
Let's do it. Yes.
Let's do it. Biden is unfortunately continuing his long established pattern of terrible foreign policy related rhetoric and actions. This time it has to do with Bolivia, which had just overcome a US-led coup. And that coup, of course, overthrew Evo Morales, who had won the election. There was no question he won the election. Even reporters who seem to be complicit in this coup admitted that he won. It's just that he didn't win by a large enough margin, which makes absolutely no sense. But with that said, Biden officials seem to be pretty salty about the coup leader's arrest. So when Evo Morales was essentially exiled, the person who ended up taking charge was not second in line in the election. It was a woman named Janine Áñez, who then not only proceeded to serve as the leader of this coup, she also proceeded to carry out brutal acts against indigenous Bolivians and also any of the supporters of Evo Morales. As many as 8 people were killed as a result. So what's interesting is that the Biden administration doesn't agree with the fact that she's been arrested. I would argue, I wouldn't agree with her decision to remain in the country as if she did nothing wrong. Like what? So before I get to more details, Nando, I know you've been covering this. I wanted to get some of your thoughts.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the most remarkable chutzpah you could ever imagine, right? They're expressing grave concerns over the human rights of Janine Áñez just because she's being held in a totally kind of humane prison. I mean, certainly compared to the prisons in the United States. While they investigate whether this was a crimes that are worth convicting for a large length of time. I mean, in the United States, people get thrown in jail all the time before they see trial, and sometimes even for over a year, sometimes 2 years, sometimes as long as 3 years. They're in jail before they get a trial. But of course, we have to moralize about the human rights, supposed human rights violations in a country in which we, if not actively participated, certainly gave political cover to a right-wing military coup, which led to untold death and destruction. I mean, really, we won't really know how many people died as a result of the sort of counter protests and protests that happened in the wake of the coup, the repressions from the state, the unleashing of police officers and the armed forces on innocent protesters and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, it is just utterly shameful. It's outrageous. It's really like the meddling of the United States inside the judicial affairs of a legitimately democratically elected government. I mean, no one. The elections in Bolivia are not disputed by anyone at this point. This is not even the most. Yeah,
including the reporters who had seemed to back up the coup in their reporting previously, right? Just regurgitating talking points from the Organization of American States, which is the organization that alleged that there was like voter fraud taking place. The Washington Post actually reported that the OAS was wrong, right?
Yeah.
And then they proceeded to publish an op-ed, the editorial board did, with this: the Biden administration should lead a regional effort to preserve democracy or democratic stability in this long-suffering country, lest crisis turn into catastrophe. What?
Democratic stability is such a tell. I mean, it's just, where was that outrage when they led the coup in the first place? I mean, this is just, I mean, there was an election after the right-wing coup happened, and in which Luis Arce won, and there is not a single ounce of doubt on that election result. I mean, obviously, like the election result that Evo Morales won in beforehand, also there should be no doubt, but there was stuff in the press. So you can imagine, like even if we're granting them that, which we should not, in this new round, there are no doubts. So this is just pure and unadulterated meddling inside the affairs of a country that has democratically elected its government and has every right in the world to decide how and when and in what way to prosecute the criminals that aided and abetted a right-wing military coup. Like there's no place for the United States, given the judicial system we have in this country, where we put more people in jail than anyone else, where we torture people by putting them in solitary confinement, torture according to the Geneva Conventions, where we have trials without prisoners without trials in Guantanamo forever and with no hope of a trial or anything like that. For us to then be moralizing about the judicial processes of a democratically elected government is absolute lunacy. Should be no one should take this seriously, not even a little bit. It's none of these paeans to human rights have any sort of standing in any way. So it's absolutely insane that the Biden administration is pursuing this line through Secretary of State Tony Blinken, who has adopted a pose towards Latin America that is indistinguishable, obviously, from Trump's, indistinguishable really from any American president in the last several decades, in which we have the right to pick and choose the leaders of countries in Latin America, not the Latin American people themselves. We choose, and if we don't like it, we do whatever it takes to put the guy we do like.
Well, Anthony Blinken did release a statement about this as well. And so US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said in a statement that there are questions about the legality of the arrests and urged Bolivia to release the detainees pending an independent and transparent inquiry into human rights and due process concerns, which again, like when you're so right, when you take a step back and you look at the context of human rights abuses and the illegality of police actions, for instance. I mean, we're currently experiencing the Derek Chauvin trial in real time, and there's no comment about that. But there's a comment about the authorities in Bolivia deciding, I think correctly, to detain the leader of a right-wing coup in their country, and someone who was incredibly brutal to supporters of Evo Morales and protesters in the wake of the coup, as you mentioned. And luckily, they were able to come together and overcome that coup. And luckily, they did have a democratic election. But I do want to note that Janine Áñez did everything in her power to prevent that election from happening. She kept delaying the election, and there's no comment from Anthony Blinken about that. And I would venture to say, this is just my speculation, that this is exactly why you don't nominate think tank people like Anthony Blinken. He created a think tank after the Obama administration, which was heavily funded by defense contractors. That's why you don't want that type of corruption in the White House. And for anyone who was like, come on, why are you complaining about this? Trump's finally out of office. No, well, Trump might be out of office, but as Noam Chomsky shared recently, there's really no difference between Trump's foreign policy and Biden's foreign policy so far. And that's an issue. It's a huge issue that we need to be honest about.
Yeah, I mean, liberals always get mad at the left when they say like, oh, you guys say that the two parties are the same. There are some differences between the party, but between the two parties. But in the realm of foreign policy, even a grotesque figure like Trump is just par for the course of US longstanding US policy. One of which, for example, is the absolute impunity which the United States ascribes to itself when it comes to international law. The United States, for example, does not recognize the authority of the International Criminal Court over its own citizens. But it does recognize that authority on the citizens of other people. The United States does not recognize the authority of the Geneva Conventions over its own actions, but it does really, love to say like, oh, this is a human rights violation to other countries it doesn't like. So the absolute, the United States acting with impunity in foreign affairs is a 100% bipartisan consensus. There is no challenging that within the two-party structure. Zero, not one person who is like within the power structures of either party would ever challenge those totems of consensus of the US foreign policy. The consensus of empire is Democrat, it's Republican, and everything in between.
Yeah, absolutely. And just quickly going back to the editorial board over at the Washington Post, they mentioned the importance of preserving democratic stability. I want them to take a good hard look at what the result of the American version of democratic stability looks like at the border, really. Because the meddling that the United States is engaged in, the US-backed coups that the United States has implemented in many Latin American countries has led to that crisis at the border. And I know some people have issues with referring to it as a crisis, but it is a crisis it's a crisis when you have parents who are so desperate to get their children to safety that they will literally allow for them to travel in this treacherous journey to the United States because that's literally the only option they think they have. Okay, and that's not because, maybe these governments just don't know what they're doing. No, the United States has gone in. The United States has overthrown democratically elected leaders. I mean, there's a long history of that. And when we're talking about Guatemala, again, US-led coup in the 1950s, all of this stuff has consequences, guys. And that's why it's important that anytime there are discussions about solutions to immigration, just simply saying like, maybe we need to build more facilities. No, that's not the solution. Maybe we need to do that. Maybe we need to put monitoring anklets on them. Stop thinking about Band-Aids. Okay, take a step back and think about how our actions in other countries have led to what we're experiencing right now. We're just not honest about it, and I think that's really the heart of this immigration problem. And also one other thing, let's keep it real. Republicans don't really do anything about immigration. Democrats don't really do anything about immigration because they're addicted to the cheap labor. They might pretend otherwise, but I'm not buying it. They're bought off by their corporate donors. That's all they care about, and their corporate donors love the cheap labor. Post game is next. See you there.